Yo guys, how's it doing? It's Lucas Nitro here, or if you want, you just Nitro, and today we are back with another what if. Now this one's going to be a continuation of our previous what if, that being, what if Cell had Kami cells? So if you guys have seen the part 1, which I highly recommend you check out, in fact it would make sense if you saw part 2, like, before part 1. So yeah, go check that out if you want to understand what's going on, because this is, a continuation. But if you did check that one out, you guys will know that the idea for this what if was inspired by a comment left by the user named Jonathan Olivo. So shout out to him. And before we get started, I just want to say I'm using my headset mic for this, so if it sounds, hopefully it sounds good. If my voice sounds, I guess, a bit muffled, then that's probably why. But yeah, I just want to test out this new mic. If this does sound good, then I'm definitely going to keep using it, because the headset mics don't stay stationary, whereas the phone mic, which I was using before, I was holding it. That led to sometimes my voice would alternate, like, so it would get louder or quieter. That's because I was holding my phone mic. But yeah, with all that said, let's get straight into the what if. It's been 2 to 3 months since Brody and Paragus had arrived at Earth. I'm sure it's pretty safe to say that they would have settled in by now, especially as they would have found some new friends during this time, that being Bulma. How they met is, a month into their arrival, Paragus had taken Brody far from civilization to train. Of course, at the level Brody was at now, which is extremely high thanks to his spar with Beerus, taking him away from civilization was a great move on Paragus' part, as their venues would always become damaged. Soon, Bulma would detect massive seismic activity from that area and travel there. This would be a bit of a dramatic moment, as she would be prepared, expecting it to be Cell. So she would be surprised to see Brody and Paragus. After noticing their armor and commenting on how it looks like Saiyan's armor, she is able to get their attention. Paragus asks how Bulma knows of the Saiyans, but Bulma doesn't answer, instead taken aback by how bad they smell. She finds out that though they have a lot of money, they just spend it on food, and so she would offer them a place to stay, or at least wash up, which they accept. At first, Paragus is dismissive of Bulma, but eventually he and Brody learn to trust her, as they see that she is a good person. After explaining their situation, Bulma assists them, allowing them to use the gravity room. After some time, Paragus would ask Bulma how she came up with the idea of an artificial gravity room, as well as armor similar to what the Saiyans wore, and he would find that she had a husband who was a Saiyan. He would want to ask more, but can see that she is still grieving, and decides to let her be. Eventually, 2 to 3 months would pass, and Brody's training would be coming along well. As they were leaving the gravity machine, they would be greeted by Wiz, who had come on request from Beerus to pick them up for an assessment on Brody's training. One switch of venues later, and their spar would commence. This fight would be far more intense than their previous match, and would go on for quite a while longer, though this time it would be interrupted by Champa and Phados.
Whoa, Nitro! Why are Champa and Phados in Universe 7 so early?
Shouldn't they have arrived way into the future? Alright, I know this is a big change, but out of universe, we know that this is simply because God of Destructions simply weren't thought of back then. So we'll just say that in universe, Champa and Phados planned on meeting with Beerus whenever he wakes up, and they only recently had just found out. So here they are. Also, as for Babidi, he's still trying to revive Boo, but there simply isn't enough ki for him to do so. So he's just in his ship, biding time. So our Beerus Champa change only affects their arcs. Anyways, as we know, Champa arrives to challenge Beerus. Thanks to witnessing Brody's power, they come up with the idea of a set of battles which would take place. After conversing a while longer, this idea eventually evolves into a tournament they could do, named the Tournament of Destroyers. They finalize the details and take their leave. The tournament would pretty much be the same, including no kill rules, thanks to Paragus. We know he doesn't prefer to kill, at least for no reason, as he saves the Frieza soldier in the movie. That and Bulma's human ways could have rubbed off on him a bit. Anyway, on their way back to Earth, Beerus gives Paragus the job of recruiting, telling him that if he needs any help, that he should call him. Paragus accepts his offer, saying he knows of some planets with strong warriors, but will need their help in getting there. Beerus understands and tells Wiz to transport and assist them wherever, if it meant they would get a good team. They would arrive at the same place they had left, which would be Capsule Corp's entrance. Bulma would greet them, and Paragus would explain to Bulma of the current situation. and how he was thinking of going to planets he knew of having great fighters for recruits. But Bulma would be thinking of another plan, one that she says can guarantee a fighter that may be able to keep up with Broly. This gets everyone's attention. She goes to Wiz and asks him how much he's actually allowed to help them. Wiz answers, saying he can help them as much as they need, as long as it gets them the required number of fighters. Bulma suggests for Wiz to take them to King Kai, as he has detailed knowledge on the many species of the universe, so it would be best to go for him for recommendations. Wiz takes them all to King Kai. This would be interesting, as although Bulma had heard King Kai before, she had actually never seen him, so this would be their first time meeting each other. Anyway, once they arrive, Bulma would be greeted by a familiar face. It would be Goku. This would be a very touching moment, what with Bulma's reunion with Goku and all.
Whoa, whoa, whoa! Wait, Nitro! How is Goku still allowed to keep his body despite not dying to Cell's explosion, as his sacrifice for the world was originally what granted him that privilege?
I believe Goku would still be granted that privilege, as despite not sacrificing himself for the world here, he did die trying to save it. Ultimately, it did end up sparing it from Cell's wrath, as he left the Earth due to satisfaction of his fight with Goku, and to seek further goals. Even if this wouldn't count, I'm sure King Kai would throw in a word or two to ensure that Goku had kept his body. After their reunion, Wiz would ask who this was, and Bulma would introduce Goku to everyone who would be interested in Broly. Bulma would suddenly get an idea and ask Wiz if he could do it. Wiz says if it will help them, then he can, before deciding to hear Bulma out. After Bulma tells him, he nods, letting her know he can, and points to Goku, removing his halo. He would then say he can now join us in the Tournament of Destroyers, shocking everybody present. Well, everyone apart from Bulma. Goku wouldn't believe it. He had just been revived. Thanks to Dende's death, the Dragon Balls had been rendered useless, so Goku had truly believed this was it for him. Now he had gotten a second chance, and he would make sure he wouldn't waste it. I'm sure some of you probably guessed what I'm going for. If you didn't, what I'm essentially doing here is giving Goku enough reason to, go back to a C mindset. Not the whole Superman architecture the Dob tried to give him, just a mature mindset he had. So I'm not too sure whether the dead can sense ki or not, but assuming they can't, Goku would have only just been able to sense Broly's ki now. If not, then he would have chosen now to speak on it. He would go over to Broly and compliment him on his power level, before asking if they could spar sometime. Paragus would have been about to tell Goku to back off from Broly, but he heard Goku sparring him fight, which reminded him of the reason why Bulma had wanted to resurrect Goku in the first place. Well, at least to his knowledge. This was so Broly could finally have a decent training partner. For now, he had only trained in the gravity machine with Paragus, so perhaps Goku would be able to hone his fighting ability and shape it into proper skills. Paragus would introduce himself and Broly, before saying he had heard much about the great martial artist Goku from Bulma. He would then ask if Goku could train Broly and teach him any skills that may be useful, which of course Goku would gladly accept. So while Wiz, King Kai and Beerus would discuss potential recruits, Goku heads back to Earth to train with Broly. Once he arrives at Earth, he would drop off Bulma at Capsule Corp first. She'll tell him to be sure to win for their friends, which he would agree, and teleport with Broly and Paragus to the hyperbolic time chamber. Here, he would reunite with Popo and ask if they could use it for training, which Popo would allow. Though the room hadn't been reconstructed yet, it would still function the same as how it used to, meaning no spending as long as they want in there. Seeing as how Goku only had around 3 hours left, which translates to a bit over a month, Goku and Broly would spend that time training inside. Though, when the time nears its end, Goku, who would be enjoying his sparring, wouldn't have kept enough track on time, and yeah, the door disappears. Goku becomes frustrated, saying he's messed up again, and that he should have focused on the door instead of on his spar. Though Broly would have a different reaction. Seeing Goku, who had become his friend during this time, frustrated, would get him angry, and he wouldn't be able to control himself. He would scream in anger and send ki blasts in all directions. Goku, noticing this, would jump back into action and charge at him in an attempt to calm him down. Though on his way, he would notice the ki blasts would be seemingly evaporating before turning into some kind of doorway. Upon looking closer, he had noticed they looked like the exterior of the lookouts. He had put two and two together and realized that Broly had become so powerful, his ki blasts were ripping through one dimension straight to another. Goku would proceed to quickly calm down Broly. Once calmed down, Goku would explain what he believes he had just done and asks if he can do it again. It would take a couple of tries, adjusting the power and direction of the ki blast and whatnot, but eventually he would get it down and they would successfully create a tear in the dimension. Goku would be ecstatic, saying this was great, as now they both had a way to get back. He would thank Broly for fixing his mistake, before focusing back on their sparring. Thanks to this revelation, they would be able to train for the full length of what Goku and Vegeta originally trained for. They would probably have to ration their food a bit, but let's just say that due to having a month alone, Popo had time to stock up on its supplies, so there's way more than enough here. Anyways, so our two Saiyans train up here for the next few days, which ends up benefiting both of them. Goku in the obvious way of allowing him to catch up to the insane leaps in power Broly's made, whereas it benefits Broly in learning to utilize his strength in different ways. So now he would know techniques, attacks, and, well, basically just being taught the ways of a martial artist. He'll still very much be a brute, just with a bit more finesse, Oh, and as for power levels, I would say if we're talking about their levels of power now, Goku would be around Super Saiyan God level, post Battle of Gods arc, whereas Broly would be around Super Saiyan Blue level Goku, post Resurrection of F arc. This would just be their base forms, by the way. Once the 3 days was up, Broly would create a tear in between dimensions, allowing them to both leave. Upon leaving, they would be greeted by Beerus and their team members. Goku would be excited as he'd recognize one of the fighters who had been recruited. It would be Pikkon. He would tell Goku how since they had last met, he had been training and had gotten far stronger, all thanks to him in fact. Goku would say the same and introduce Broly to Pikkon. The next two people would be Monaca and Jacko. Before we jump into the fights, I gotta say that as this tournament is taking place way earlier than it did in canon, this affects the levels of Universe 6's combatants a lot, as it essentially nerfs them, equalizing the playing field a bit more, such as Hit not having progressed his time skip to the level it was originally at, and Kappa not being as strong as he was, in main canon, etc, etc. Alright, so jumping into the fights, as remember, this tournament wouldn't have Vegeta and Goku's input, so there would be no tests. The first fight would be Jacko vs Potamo. As surprising as it may sound, I'm leaning towards Jacko winning this match. I feel as if Jacko's amazing eyesight wouldn't allow for Potamo to land a single finger on him, and with Jacko's fast galactic knowledge, he could easily turn Potamo's weight against him, such as waiting for Potamo to throw an attack before grabbing it and throwing him out of the ring or something. Regardless, I'm sure Jacko would emerge the victor, though now he would be up against Frost, which, let's be real, would probably lead to him forfeiting the match after realizing how outmatched he is. Yes, Frost would be weaker than he was in canon, but he'd still be leaps and bounds ahead of Jacko. In the background, Beerus would probably glare at him, causing him to bow down and repeatedly apologize to him. In the foreground, Universe 7's second fighter would enter the fray, Pikkon. This match would end very quickly. Looking at Pikkon's attitude towards his fights, and that he's eager to show off the results of his training to Goku, I'm sure he wouldn't wait for Frost to make the first move, and goes straight for the quick KO. As soon as the match begins, Pikkon rushes at Frost with a burst of speed, in an attempt to speed blitz him. He comes pretty close, but thanks to Frost's crazy durability, he is able to withstand these unpredictable attacks. Feeling that he has already been put to a disadvantage, he decides to transform from the get-go. Mid-transformation though, he sees Pikkon begin some sort of technique, and decides it best to go straight into his final form. Big mistake. Making the late decision to switch into his final form takes a bit more time than it would if he had kept going to his third form, giving Pikkon just enough time to launch his fire technique. This takes out Frost with ease, knocking him out of the ring. Though here, I'm sure he'd keep his composure as he realizes there's no longer anything he can do. This means that everyone doesn't find out that he is who he is. Next up, Vegeta. This would definitely be a tricky fight for Pikkon, as I'm sure his heat would have very little damaging effect on Vegeta. Though, as Pikkon was the one to discover Janemba's insult weakness, I'm sure he'll do similarly here, so it would definitely be a tough match for Pikkon, but I'm sure he'll emerge the victor by exploiting his weakness, then ending it with another flame attack. As for the fight with Cabba, let's make a bit of a change here. Seeing as this tournament wouldn't be the same as it was in canon, let's say Goku actually switches in here. As it was never made a rule that one mustn't switch out before or after a match here, and it would seem as if the God of Destructions are just making it up on the spot, which they are, but they wouldn't want the mortals taking notice, so they would both allow it. Champa is confident in Cabba's abilities, so he sees no reason as to not allow this. Speaking of Cabba's abilities, as this would be taking place way earlier in... As this would be taking place way earlier than in canon, Cabba would be far weaker, still a bit superior to Goku's current level, as Goku's at his post-Battle of Gods level, instead of his pre-Tournament Destroyers level, which is significantly stronger by the way. So Goku enters the ring, as does Cabba, and they face off. They both humbly introduce themselves, before giving a respectful bow, and the fight begins. Seeing as Goku is at a lower level than his main counterpart, as he hadn't gone up against Golden Frieza, nor done his post-resurrection of F training, Cabba actually has the greater advantage here. Well, that is in raw strength and power. As the fight goes on though, Goku begins to adjust to Cabba's fighting style, and uses his martial arts knowledge, skills and techniques to gain the edge. Before long, the fight would be at equal ground, with neither having an advantage. Cabba, realizing this, would be confused, as he knew he was stronger than his opponent just a few minutes ago. Perhaps he was getting a few lucky hits in? Whatever the case, he mustn't give him time to regain his stamina. Without warning, he charges at full speed, straight to Goku, aiming to stop and teleport behind to attack him at his blind spot. Though Goku is one step ahead of him, anticipating his upcoming attack, as Cabba teleports, he uses the After Image technique to confuse Cabba's senses after he teleports, creating an opening for him to attack. Goku's able to land a quick flurry of attacks on Cabba, dealing moderate damage. After Cabba regains his composure, Goku begins to taunt for him to attack, hoping for Cabba to notice his flawed fighting style, which he doesn't. Cabba attacks, and this goes on for a while, with Goku exploiting his flaws, until Goku stops Cabba and points out that he can't hope to beat him at his current level. Cabba, becoming slightly frustrated, questions for why. Goku explains that although Cabba is stronger, he mustn't think that that is all it takes to beat his opponent. He begins to point out the flaws in the way he fights, and improvements that can be made, which Cabba would then thank him for. Once they had resumed their fight, Cabba would see the immediate improvement of taking Goku to fight. It would lead to an almost completely one-sided match. Cabba would have Goku on the ropes the entire time, with Goku now having to go extremely on the defensive to be able to have a chance. Though, Cabba would notice that Goku's expression hadn't changed once during their match. Despite being pushed so much, it looked like he hadn't even broken a sweat. Before Cabba could begin another assault, Goku would stop him, this time though complimenting him on the massive improvements he had made, and would say that he was now being pushed to even having to transform. This is where Cabba's Saiyan knowledge hits a wall. He'd be confused, not understanding what Goku had meant by having to transform. Cabba would ask what he had meant by that, and Goku would repeat, before asking if he was able to transform into a Super Saiyan. Cabba would slowly shake his head, not knowing whether or not Goku was joking. Goku would then show he was serious, transforming into a Super Saiyan immediately. This would shock all of Universe 6, excluding Hit of course. Cabba's jaw would drop, which is an understandable reaction considering how he was at ground zero of the Super Saiyan Goku. He couldn't believe the crazy energy Goku was now emitting. He would now understand why Goku wasn't breaking a sweat before. Goku, seeing Cabba's stunned expression, would realize that he really can't turn into a Super Saiyan, though he would see this as a new challenge and was determined to help him become a Super Saiyan. Before Cabba could even ask, Goku would begin trying to help him in achieving the transformation. He would begin to explain the fundamentals of Super Saiyan and how it's a power that comes in response to a need instead of desire. Although rage seems to be the fastest way of achieving it, because you know, Goku actually understands a lot of the inner workings of Super Saiyan, thanks to his master Super Saiyan training.
So guys, as I've been doing the tutor devious nitro here, just to let you guys know that I'm gonna have to cut this video short because this video is a total of currently it's a total of 40 minutes long, and yeah, it has to be cut half. You know, to ensure that this gets uploaded and edited in time for this week, and yeah, it's just way too long. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed the what if you did, don't forget to leave a comment, a like, and above all subscribe, and yeah, be sure to tune in. I'm hoping I upload the next part next week, so yeah, be sure to tune in then to see the continuation of what happens. You know, does Cabra actually reach Super Saiyan? And how else does this tournament change? But yeah, as I previously said, I hope you guys enjoyed this what if. Be sure to comment below your thoughts on it, if you liked it, if you didn't like it, and yeah, just tell me what you didn't like it if you don't like it. And yeah, with that all said, peace out guys.